Hi everyone, my name is Ibn and welcome to a brand new episode of How Do You Do? In today's episode we're going to take a look at a concept that Mike introduced, which is called breaking and setting bones. Breaking and setting bones is essentially looking at the project that you've been working on and looking at flaws that you want to fix, issues that you see, things that you're no longer happy with, and when you come to a point where you're like, okay, I need to delete a whole bunch of things and redo a bunch of things. That's usually a very difficult thing to do for anyone who works on a project, because you sometimes work on it for a very long time and it ends up being not entirely what you want. And then you come to a point where you want to change things. When you get over the hurdle and you say to yourself, okay, I'm gonna change things, I'm gonna redo things, you start breaking bones and setting them. This is of course not when you do little changes, but when you make bigger changes. In this episode, we're going to take a look at 3 zoos, because each zoo represents a form of bone breaking, a reason why you would break bones in your project. These zoos are going to be Koali Zoo, Tivoli Zoo and Saint Reginald Zoo. Now, I also have my own projects in which I've done bone breaking. Bone breaking happens to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're the best builder in the world or if you're just starting. It happens to all of us. I have plenty of examples from Tharmachati as well, but these 3 projects have been on my channel most recently, so I wanted to show you why I did the things in those episodes. We're gonna start looking at the first reason why you would start breaking bones, and that is logistical problems. Sometimes when you're building a park, you make choices that end up becoming a logistical problem, an issue that needs to be fixed because it doesn't work or because there are things that just simply no longer function in reality. There's a second reason why you would break bones. That reason is when your project no longer adheres to the vision of what you want it to do. And the last reason is a very specific logistical problem, which is guest flow. In this segment of the video, we're going to take a look at Koali Zoo and more specifically the Japanese area. Me and Rudy had discussed very early on that he would make the concept of this area and that I would then change a few things, and that ended up being the case. And this is one of the first logistical problems that were part of this exhibit. The leopards were able to jump on this area of the zoo, so this was something that we kind of had to fix, or leopards would have been able to escape, which is not something you want to have in the zoo. A secondary logistic problem was that there's only a staircase in this area and a second staircase here, so there was no way for people in a wheelchair to come to this area from the big cat area, so that's something that had to be changed as well. And there were some minor things. For instance, this was once I started walking around here, this kind of felt a little bit low. In real life, I would bump my head against this because I'm quite tall, and there was this water that was running here, and that ran all the way up to here until the staff pad. And if you've worked with Mike, you know that water needs a place to collect and can't just stream the way it does here. There was another little logistical problem, and that was when you were over here, there was no real views of what was next because of this building. So we have this amazing bridge that takes you to the rest of the Japanese area, but it is mostly blocked by this building. So if you're walking in here and you pass by this, you see, oh, food, and you'll continue without realizing that you could actually could have gone up to another part of this Japanese area. A secondary logistical issue was that we had a food shop over here and a seating area right here. which is a logistical issue because if I would order food and I would like order a burger and fries and I would have to walk that entire distance all the way up to here, well, I know one thing for sure, my food would be on the ground and my shirt would be covered with food because I'm clumsy as hell. So that's one of the things that needs to be changed. We need to move the food court or the food stall closer to this eating area. We'll have to make sure that the leopards can no longer escape this area. We'll have to raise that bridge a bit. We'll have to change this area to make sure that the logistical issues are fixed. And that's pretty much it. So when you start breaking bones, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you know which things you really want to change. That's the first step. The second step is looking at all the things that you have and make sure that you know which things you want to preserve. For instance, this courtyard area was amazing and I love it to bits, so that had to be preserved. This pagoda, these other pagodas were amazing, so again, those had to be preserved. The viewing area you have over here and the stream that goes down were also things that I really wanted to keep. So I needed to make sure that I didn't remove all of that right away. That would have taken away the amazingness of this area. I also really liked this stacked stone feature, so I really wanted to preserve that and make some extra ones actually. Another logistical problem that we had here were all these amazing topiaries and this Japanese styled flower beds and stuff, which are incredibly cool and are amazing to see. But however, they wouldn't really work within a leopard exhibit because you don't have time to come in and fix these topiaries every single day. So in the next segment, we're going to take a look at the changes and why we did those changes. But for now, are they? No, I thought the leopard was doing that very special. It kind of is. The leopards have this very special sleeping animation on logs, which is really cool, but it's not that one. Before we continue, as I said, we're going to take a look at 3 zoos, Tivoli, Koali Zoo and Saint Reginald Zoo. All the bone breaking that had to be done were in areas of other people. This is, again, and I really want to stress this and I really want to reiterate this, this is something. This doesn't mean the fact that their bones were broken doesn't mean that the original builds were bad or that they weren't well crafted. All of the people who've worked on these areas, being Wyatt, being Rubel, being Carlos, are incredible builders. They are amazing at what they do. But these were just areas that required some changes and that in the end had the end result were kind of better with the issues that we were faced here. I also have examples of my own park. I'm quite famous for deleting half Tharmachati. So we all do that. These are just the more recent examples. Okay, let's take a look at the first changes in the next segment. Going over the changes in this area, we'll start with where we started first. And this is the area where we had a bunch of stairs, which made it impossible for wheelchair users to basically come from the Big Cat area and come over here to the Japanese area. So we entirely got rid of the stairs entirely. Wow, even English. So that we would be able to add a ramp here, which is of course a better thing than a staircase. Of course, it's not perfect. I try my best, but I was a bit limited in space, so I had to do what I was able to do, but there was not much more to do. But this was the first major bone that was broken. We got rid of this entire section and we redid it so that everyone could use it. I also made sure, as I said in the previous segment, that the leopards weren't able to break out anymore by making this a bit of a slope, I made sure to keep this rock feature, and I even added a second one because it's so amazing. As you can see, I changed the plans of this exhibit as well. I added fencing for the leopards so that they can't escape. And the only area where I did want to keep Rudy's really cool plants was over here, because in reality they will still be able to reach this, but this was so cool and I really didn't want to get rid of everything. The second issue that we mentioned was the water flowing all the way over here and flowing directly into the staff area. Now we have a basin over here where all the water gets collected, so it can be pumped up again and can be used in the macaque exhibit. As I mentioned as well, we changed the location of the food stalls, which is right over here, and now much closer to these cool pagodas in this cool seating area, so people like me wouldn't have to walk all that way and risk dropping our food because we're clumsy like that. So yeah, that was a major change that I really like, and I think has improved this area quite a lot. But as I also said before that, there are things that we really wanted to keep. We kept the original pagodas, they were amazing. We kept this one, which is also absolutely amazing. One of the things that I also kept, I changed, but I kept, which is kind of sounds a little bit weird and kind of doesn't make sense. But Rudy had these raised path levels both here and on this exhibit, but those were made using regular pieces, and I'm a sucker for things to be usable by guests, so I made sure that all of those areas are now usable. So it is a change, but it was a feature that I liked so much that I really did my best to reincorporate it as much as possible. I'm really happy with the result. And then we'll go to this area, and as I mentioned, we had an issue that there was something obstructing the view to the next area. I still wanted to have a centerpiece here because Rudy was correct about having this small centerpiece creating a kind of funnel effect, especially with the Japanese foliage, which I really loved. But I had to make it a little bit more open so that you could actually see the bridge and could see the way forward, and that's why I went for this watering hole pit thing. Water well. Wow, I'm not good with words today. So yeah, those were the first logistical problems that we saw and tackled. And as you can see, even though some major bones were broken, we've changed this. This was also changed to be wired. This was changed. This was basically redone. These things were redone. This was also redone. Major bones were broken, but the original vision of that Rudy had, and Rudy had concept art and all kinds of stuff, so that made it very easy for me to work with. The original vision is preserved, and that's super important, especially when you're breaking bones in someone else's project or breaking bones of things in a collaboration and doing stuff on that your other collaborators have worked on. So it's always very important to make sure that the original vision that they had, that those are still preserved. And it's very important, especially because the thing that Mike always said is like he also moves things around and deletes stuff and changes stuff, and he always says, look, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think this area had so much potential and I didn't like this thing that you've built. He has done that to things that I've built many times already, and now that I've done it as well, I understand where it comes from. It's never from a point where you're like, oh, this person has built something bad. It's never that. You're always doing this from a perspective where you're like, okay, I love what you've done and I think I can help making it even better. So yeah, this was the first section about bone breaking where we fixed logistical problems. In the next segment, we're going to take a look at where we fix things to fit the original vision of the project a little bit more, which is going to be in Tivoli Zoo. All right, we are in a pretty old version of Tivoli Zoo. As you can see, the entire Asian elephant area wasn't in the zoo at this point yet. But I'm going to use Tivoli Zoo as an example of what happens when you want to break bones in terms of restoring the vision of a zoo. This area was made by Carlos, and again, this is absolutely not a skill issue or the fact that like Carlos did a bad job. Absolutely not. What Carlos created was amazing and really cool, but I was tasked by Rubel to update it a little bit so that it fit more with the vision of the concept art, which is another reason why you would break bones. And we're gonna take a look at what we are going to change. First of all, what we wanted to change was this building. The reason for that was that the building kind of distracted from the entire natural plus architectural feel that this area was supposed to have. As you can see, you have the cool mountains in the background, but that view is broken up by this this viewing area with the metal construction at the top. So that was something that Rubel really wanted to have changed because it was clashing with the vision he had for the project. Overall, he was pretty happy with everything in this area. We ended up changing it a little bit, but not that much. But he was really happy with this, and especially this walkway is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the best ones I've seen so far, and it's made using these old bunting pieces. Like Carlos didn't even have those mesh pieces that we have today, yet he was able to create this walkway, which is fully functional, which was amazing. And this brings us to another area where we're going to say, like, okay, when you are going over areas where you want to break bones, it's always good to highlight which things you want to get rid of, but also highlight the things that you want to preserve. And especially this overhead walkway was so amazing that there was absolutely no way that we would get rid of this. This is absolutely fantastic. And when you have tigers walking in here, it's absolutely brilliant. So that was for sure something that we wanted to keep. What we did want to get rid of was the second walkway over here, because it kind of felt like it was too much. It took away from the specialness of this walkway and clashed then with what we wanted for this area. Rubel also really wanted red pandas in this area, so we kind of changed that up as well, as you will see in the final version. And one of the things that for Rubel kind of clashed with his vision was the fact that this felt really much like a zoo. And that might sound weird, but if you look at the concept art of the Denver Zoo, which is what Rubel is basing his Tivoli Zoo on, then you'll see quite quickly that it's not your classic zoo. So it doesn't really have that many glass viewing areas where you can get really up close. It doesn't have these chain link areas which remind you that you're still in a zoo. Everything in the master plan kind of feels like it was made to take away the idea that you're in the zoo and that you're actually in the wild. So areas like these kind of clashed with the vision. And it is sometimes difficult to find a balance between honoring the vision that you wanted from the start and making things realistic. In this case, for Rubel, this was too much leaning into the realistic zoo feel, because at the end of the day, if the Denver Zoo would starts implementing the master plan and starts implementing the Asian area of that, then they most likely would end up with something like this, because you have the concept art on one hand, and in reality there's all kinds of design changes that you need to do to make it actually work. But that wasn't what Rubel wanted. Rubel wanted something that was really close to the Denver Zoo master plan, so he decided to get rid of that and went for a more natural option. There was also, he really liked this area, but he wanted a bigger, just like in the concept art as well, he wanted to have a bigger enclosure here. I think I might be on a older version of this exhibit, because I'm pretty sure this was closer in the file that I got to work with. But yeah, this was once again the same. I don't want to use the word issue, because it's not a mistake, or it's not an issue per se. But this was another example of something that was really zooified, with chain link fences and making things much more how it would actually be in a zoo. But that again clashes with what Rubel had as his vision for the project. So that's why I was asked to change a few things in this area, which I'm going to show you in the next segment of this video. But this is also like a good example of something can be really good and really well made, and I really want to stress this, because Carlos is by far one of the best zoo builders in this community. Whatever he touches, he turns into gold in my eyes. But if it doesn't adhere to the vision that you had in your mind, then you'll still feel the need to break the bones. I've done the same with Tharmachati. I'm kind of known for deleting half my zoo right at the start, because I was straying away too far from the vision that I had originally, and that made me get rid of a whole bunch of things that I built earlier. So that's something that's going to happen in this area as well. Doesn't take away the fact that this is absolutely brilliant, and if this would have been built, if the master plan would be built in real life, something like this was much more realistic to happen in real life. But as Rubel wanted, he wanted something that was closer to his vision. So let's go over some of the areas that we really want to preserve. As mentioned, we do want to have this overhead walkway. That one is absolutely brilliant. The mountain and the forced perspective that Carlos was able to make, and I have not seen anyone replicate to the level that he's been able to do it, was certainly a highlight that we really wanted to preserve. So that's something that's going to stay as well. We also really liked these huts, but we knew that we had better pieces now, pieces that Carlos didn't have when he built this area. So that was something that we wanted to reuse as well, but update a little bit. And these font piece based, I don't know how to call them, totem poles things. Those were absolutely amazing as well. So we really wanted to keep those too. One of the things that I then really wanted to keep was, and I'll see if I can find it here, this little rock statue. It's so brilliant in its simplicity. So I really wanted to keep that in. But as I said, this is an episode about breaking bones and about changing things. So we're going to take a look in the next segment about what has changed and why these changes were made. When we take a look at the area after we've broken some bones and reset them, we get to see what we wanted to do with the vision. So first of all, the master plan leans very heavily into environmental storytelling and focusing on letting people feel like they are at the specific places that the zoo is trying to represent. So one of the first things we did was represent the deforestation in Russia and in Siberia, to be very specific. And this also gave us the opportunity to prevent the mountain from being blocked, which, if you go all the way back, this cool rockwork here by Wyatt blends in super well with the mountain in the back. And because of the fact that we have a new construction here without the blue metallic roof, we're no longer distracted by the mountain, and that was one of the first things that we had to change. So let's take a look at that. I opted for a more natural colored design. That way it would blend in with the mountain from afar. It doesn't blend in completely because, of course, I also really wanted to make sure that it matched with the real life thing that it was inspired by. But it doesn't take away from the view of the mountain, which was incredibly important. As I mentioned, this overhead walkway is magnificent, so there's no way we would delete this. So we made sure that this is still part of the entire area. What we did do was create a one long walkway. That was also something Rubel asked, and I did mention in the previous segment of this video, because he did want this to have a very open, inviting feel that would draw you to this area of the zoo. So that's something that I did as well. There were no major bones being broken here. The only thing that I did was replace the fencing with a more accurate fencing from the Denver Zoo, but I don't really consider that breaking bones because it's not like a massive change. Neither is adding a bit more plants and trees. That's not big enough to warrant a bone-breaking change. What was a bone-breaking change was the removal of the snow leopard bridge and changing the habitat of the snow leopard into a single snow leopard habitat and a red panda habitat. And I think if you compare this to the bone breaking that we did in Koali Zoo, this is already a much bigger step. And in the next segment, when we're going to look at Saint Reginald Zoo, the bone breaking is even bigger. But it shows that there's kind of levels of bone breaking that you can do in these kinds of projects. And I think that the end result leans in much closer towards the master plan of the Denver Zoo. Especially this exhibit now really feels like how it looks in the master plan. I'm also going to, if I don't forget, I'm going to put up a picture of the master plan and what it looks like. And this already leans in much closer to what Rubel wanted in his vision. As I said, we did want to make sure that we still incorporated design elements and design choices from the previous version. Because again, the previous version wasn't bad. There was nothing fundamental wrong in it, in the way it was built. There were really good things in it, so we did recuperate as much as possible. For instance, as I said, I really wanted to make sure that this little statue was reused. These little totem poles were also reused. This, I really hope Frontier fixes this issue where they will completely ignore barriers if it means that they're gonna watch a memorial plaque. So yeah, this is a big change. This entire habitats have been gone, entire areas have been reconstructed, but at the end, I think this leans much closer to the master plan and to the vision that Rubel had when he started building this. So I'm quite happy with the result. I know that Rubel is also very happy with the result. And at the end of the day, that's when you realize, like, okay, I understand why this bone had to be broken and had to be reset. Sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes it feels, especially when you're doing it on not your own work but the work of someone else. That is especially tricky because you do want to pay respect to the original builder. But there were things that especially Rubel wanted to see differently, and I really tried to adhere to his vision as much as possible. And this also continued on to other exhibits that we added in the latest Tivoli Zoo episode. As you can see, we've added all of these extra enclosures. We have a doll exhibit over here, which I'm still super proud of and super happy with. It looks amazing, if I say so myself. And we also have this exhibit with the sun bear and the binturong, and that was another case where where I really wanted to stick with the vision that the project had. And so I made sure to reincorporate as many elements that Rubel had already used, like these walls, the overall palette in terms of plants and trees, made sure that this fence also kind of matched the other areas, and that is essential because the vision is what unifies your entire project. You can have vastly different areas in your entire zoo, especially Tivoli Zoo clearly shows that. We have an Asian section over here, we have a coastal section over there, there's an African savanna area right over there. But the same techniques and the same styles of building are used throughout each area, and that way each area can be as different as they are without it feeling like it was cobbled together by tons of different builders. If it is tough to do, and especially when you're guest building for someone, especially in a style that technically isn't your style, but the end result is more than worth it. So we've seen two versions of bone breaking. We've seen the one at Koali where there were some logistical issues that we had to fix. We've seen Tivoli Zoo where there were issues with the vision, the original vision of the project, where the exhibits no longer matched the original vision. And now we're going to look at the third and final reason why I break bones in my own projects and in the projects that I'm part of, and that is guest flow. And for that, we're going to take a look at Saint Reginald Zoo. Okay, let's look at the final example of breaking bones, and this time around we're going to look at Saint Reginald Zoo. And the thing about this was that there was no problem in terms of the vision. This was still well within the boundaries of what the vision was from the start. There were no real logical problems, but there was an issue with guest flow. And I wanted to keep this one as the last of the examples, because usually when you have to change something because of guest flow, this means that you'll have to change quite a lot of things. And I'll show you what actually went wrong in terms of guest flow. When you arrive at this section of the park, you walk in, pass by the entrance, and the problem was that there was only one real path directing you towards the other area of the zoo. You clearly have the tower over here as the weenie, as Sylv would call it, so you're automatically drawn to that point of the zoo. The issue with that is that it probably becomes quite easy to just pass by this pavilion if you don't even take the time to look at the logo. You practically miss it and you would just look at it as, okay, this is just a gazebo. And the second issue was that this was put on a hill, which was actually quite good because the final version of this area is also built on a slope. But the downside of it was that from a guest perspective, as you can see, it's hard to see what else is behind this. So there was nothing that was actually drawing you into this area, which meant that there was just one way forward towards the zoo instead of having a loop like we wanted to. Our first solution to this issue was basically we were going to close this area up and make it so that you as a guest would go through this closed loop and then continue on towards the rest of the zoo. That's not what we chose. As you could see in the last Saint Reginald Zoo episode. Oh, that was such a lens flare that I think Michael Bay would actually love this episode. So that was our first solution. And when I was in a call with Mike, I was like, yeah, we're gonna fix it like this. And he said the words that I will forever keep in mind is, yeah, you can't detail yourself out of this one, you need to break this up. And the reason for that is actually because there already is a section where the guests get funneled. Let me bring you to the main plaza of the zoo, the entrance plaza of the zoo. So you come on this area, you have your first plaza, and then you get funneled in and things begin to get a little bit closer. And this makes it feel a little bit more cramped, which isn't bad, which isn't always bad in terms of guest flow, because now you are in a kind of mystery and you have no idea what is coming next, and you slowly walk down this path and end up at this area. And the problem was that after having gone from an open area over here to a funnel over here to create the mystery, we actually had to have the effect of, okay, now the zoo opens up and now we can actually see what we're here for. And when we had these two planters here as well, we created another funnel after the funnel that we already had, and that's of course not what we wanted to have. So the things that we had to break, the bones that we had to break, was this area. This area would have to change so that there was a guest path that could go from here all the way up to this area, so that we would be able to make an entire loop for our zoo, which is kind of the layout that we wanted to have from the start. And that's why this bone had to be broken, had to be reset. But as you can see, this took a lot of work. We'll take a look at the final product in just a minute, but this was already a really cool area, but changing everything up, moving it to a different spot, making sure that there was a guest path over here. And when Mike said, well, you need to do this on a slope so that this building can stay the same height, stay the same height, but you can have more and extra interesting buildings in the background that people get drawn to make sure that those buildings are still visible. You'll have to make it on the slope. Slopes are much more interesting visually, and as much as I hate it, he is right, but that required quite a lot of work from me. So let's take a look at the final result of the bone that we're going to break and the bone being reset afterwards. Alright, let's take a look at the final build of this episode. As you can see, there were some major changes to Saint Reginald Zoo, and some major bones were broken, as mentioned in the previous section. These bones were broken, these bones were reset in a way that we discussed earlier. The biggest improvement that there is now is that the zoo, after going through the funnel here, opens up when you're right here as a guest, and it now offers you an actual view of where you'll go and what there is in the zoo. So we have not one but two weenies now. We have the big tower that will draw you one way into the zoo, but we also have this archway, and now the cow nose cove building becomes a secondary weenie that will draw you to this walkway if you want to follow the zoo in the other direction. And this was the main thing that we had to fix, so that guests now have a clear sight of where they could go and what they can do. We also removed these planters here. Wyatt is a big fan of having trees right at the entrance of the zoo, which we did preserve in these areas, adding trees here, adding trees there. But it still forms, it now still has a clear open view of where you can go in the zoo without obstructing your view. As you can see now, this path slopes up, and we can already see another building in the background. We've all seen that building already. We know that that is the penguin building, but this is another thing that now draws you further down the entire path, the entire zoo. And before when we had a raised section over here, there was no way of seeing what was going to be behind the Kaunos Ray building, and that view was obstructed. This time around, this is not the case. We already have something that catches our eye after we went to the Kaunos Ray section. This was one of the biggest changes, and I think it took me like about 4 days to get it all finished, which is quite a long time. A lot of time was spent struggling with getting the path, sloping the path to a, I believe it is 4.3, 4.2 angle, which is going towards the limit to what you can do in terms of slopes in zoos. That took quite a while. Redoing the entire Kaunos aquarium also took quite a lot of time, but in the end it was worth it. We now have a clear guest flow in this park, and that was quite important. So as I said, the guest, like when you have an issue with the guest flow, chances are that you'll have to break one of the you'll break one of the bigger bones, and you have to work a little bit harder to reset it. But when you do so, and when you do all the hard work that it takes, the final result is so rewarding. So I know that at the start of the video we talk about how breaking bones can sometimes be scary, and that it sometimes feels like it's easier to just detail your way out of a problem. When you see the result of your changes, you usually come to the conclusion like, okay, this was absolutely worth it. So never get scared about making changes to your project. Always look at it with an open mind. And if you do so, you'll get really cool examples like we have here. We were all very, very happy with the result of these changes, even though I wasn't really happy about the fact that Mike was right once again. Mike, if you're watching this, buddy, you know you're always right. But yeah, these changes were really worth it, and I think we have a very cool zoo now at our hands. We already had a really cool zoo at our hands, of course, but now that we have we have the foundation for an entire loop in the zoo, this is going to be really, really cool. So that's it for this episode of How Do You Do. In the next episode of How Do You Do, we'll probably take a look at backstages and how you can make backstage props and what you should and shouldn't do in terms of backstages. More specifically in recreating backstages, not really like how can you make the most perfect, accurate, realistic backstage, because I'm sure I'm not able to tell you that. I make mistakes all the time. But that's going to be the next episode of How Do You Do. The next episode on this channel, however, is going to be another Koali Zoo episode, and you'll get to see that in 2 weeks. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and see you in the next one. Bye!